Okay, I'll start my formal speech by welcoming you to the conference room here at Suzalo Library to look at these examples of the artist's book. Sandra Kroupa here is the librarian who maintains and catalogs and even buys these books to build a part of the rare books collection that addresses interests of students of contemporary art.
The rare book collection is a non-browsing and a non-circulating collection, which means you can't actually just walk to the shelves and take things off. So this is an opportunity for you to see a little bit of the kinds of things that we collect. We collect a wide variety of materials, but we specialize in modern book arts.
We have a special guest with us also, Mare Blocker, who's one of, well, there are quite a few book artists in Seattle, but Mare Blocker is an interesting individual because her history, as I understand it from our short acquaintance, is really in ceramic art. Mare, would you mind coming over here to introduce yourself, and also if you could tell us how you got into it?
I sort of stumbled into book arts because it was connected with textile degree I was working on. I was getting a degree in ceramics and textiles.
Ceramics, textile, sort of double.
Yeah. And I stumbled into it, and I hated bookbinding to begin with. And then I just started making more books, and I sent one out that's similar to this one to Chicago Art Institute and a show they were having in '81. And I came down here more on my own, and then I started bringing stuff to Sandy to have her look at it, to buy it, and then Sandy talked me into buying a press. And then Sandy talked to me into buying type. Things have ballooned, and then I got a rabbit because Sandy had one.
Now you've got lots of rabbits. I heard you mention laying flat several times, and also the notion that it should be protected. Is this supposed to lay flat, or do you like it to stand up? Well, I suppose you're going to tell us we can have it any way we like it.
No, I prefer to have these standing.
Oh, yeah.
The reason I started, well, first of all, I liked the format of this folding idea when I started making these accordion books. And I have collected beads and little trinkets and stuff since I was really tiny. And so I always like to put those things in my books and spread them around. And I think that this style of binding it doesn't really protect these beads when they're shut, but it is flexible enough so that it doesn't crush them really. And when it goes in its Library of Congress case.
Where's this Library of Congress case?
It's promised.
Yes, it's promised, but this one is my favorite one of those three, I think.
Well, I came to Sandra, as I remember her first reaction to my question, do you have artist's books, was, what do you mean by artist's book? So then I fished out this article and I said, see, it's in print. There's such a thing as artist's books. She said, well, okay, but what makes that different? And so this discussion has gone on. In the meantime, we've had speakers come in through her connections with the Northwest Book Arts Guild. Yet there's another audience for the subject of binding coming from the artists who you see downtown in the art galleries. And we were able to establish that she really should fish around and find these special books for the students in printmaking, and that's why you're here today. But you have to be conscious of the book and its place in the artist's field, and if possible, even take it further because the equivalent of the book in the future, this is futurism now, will take the shape of electronic forms. This, I guarantee, will happen. Sandra's role in all this, not to prevent it, she's not interested in preventing that, but she's interested in seeing that this tradition be maintained. So the trick, as we're all interested in how to maintain traditions of the arts in the face of change in technologies.
One of the things that is important in the books that we've gotten out that I particularly want people to be conscious of is that as a printmaker, frequently what you're making is multiples to hang on a wall somewhere, maybe in groups, maybe singly, that people have to go and approach, and there's usually something between them and the print, glass or plexiglass or something. The person that made this piece actually allows you to turn the pages and change the arrangement to some extent of the pages and what it wraps around. And so you have a personal, something personal is happening to the person who actually is using the book. And I think that seems to be what a lot of the book artists I know like about the book format, is it is something that gets closed up and is kind of secretive and can be opened up and manipulated in some way and is a very personal object, but you can still make more than one of them.
The first entry that a lot of students make into this, coming from the art school calling itself a visual arts school, is through the illustrations.
Most of the people who are represented in this group are basically printmakers. We're talking about people who are doing wood engraving, wood cuts, etchings, a little bit of silkscreen work, not a lot.
On the subject of illustration, this book is an example of etched plates which were printed relief. That's come up a couple times in the etching class already, in that the etched plate needn't be printed intaglio, as most etchings are printed. This one is printed relief. One reason is that most common typography is printed relief, so it's easier to print a plate along with the typography in the same press, so to speak, rather than having to separate the two printing processes. So here's an etched plate, printed relief. One of the subjects that's come up over the last week that I've been stressing is that the way a plate is made by etching or engraving doesn't necessarily mean that you have to print it intaglio. Plate making and print making are two separate fields. Even they can be done by two different people. The etcher can make the plate, the printer can print the plate. Or you can be schizophrenic. Tuesdays you make plates, Wednesdays you print them.
Because to some extent, if you're a printmaker and you're making the images and you have to go to someone else to print words, if you want words to go with it, you have to have a collaboration, which can sometimes be very profitable.
I think it's interesting that you're the binder who's going to put together that book called The Seminary. So can you tell how you were approached and then what you found it to be and how it turned out?
Well, Dennis went, I guess Dennis talked to you about trying to find a binder, and then he went to Sandy, and Sandy suggested 3 people. And I went to Dennis's house, and I saw the project, and I talked to him. He wanted just a binding. I talked him into letting me design a case for the binding as well as doing the binding. So the case that I've designed is in the shape of the floor plan for his piece.
The 3 of us, Jeffrey, Bishop, Keith, and myself, did a huge environmental installation. It was took a room 40 foot square to show it, and it was shown in Bellingham at the Whatcom Museum. This thing is a companion to that piece. To us, acts as an illuminated manuscript, which is a companion to a cathedral, or the plan, the Plan of St. Gall, that book that they published. Yes. And this is in our own 1984 way is the plan of the seminary, which we did. But it was more than a building, this thing that we built. It wasn't just an architecture thing. It's about words and about the origin of words and a place where words originate and then are transplanted out. And it's also based on the notion of a seminary as a place of propagation and transplanting. So we used gardens as a motif. And we set up a...
I like the use of words then here. That
Right.
just makes this
Right.
a lot more sense.
This is the plan of the actual building, and each of the 4 axes were gardens. A lily garden was the entrance. The rose garden was a place of sort of insemination, and the violet garden was a place where the words were clipped from their stems, and the iris garden was a place of death. So it works on a sort of seasonal thing.
The book opens up to sort of echo the sort of architectural structure of the piece. On these walls, the text was blown up in giant screens, that, letters this high, and in this glass bead. So when you walk by it, it'd sort of shine out on you and then
interesting, Harry.
fade.
And also the box is the plan of the piece too, and that was actually Mare contributed that to us a lot. She looked at the piece. This is the text, sort of the text in capital letters that ran through the piece.
How many copies of this did you make?
10.
The book itself?
10. Yeah. Now the way these pages were done is that these pages were, the black outlines were silk screened, and then they're all hand drawn and hand painted inside. So each page is reasonably unique in that, to a certain extent.
Again, since that's where my orientation is, I really look at how the binding works for this. In so many cases, when artists use single sheets like this, it doesn't work. But I like the way they're sewn as signatures with the stub. I don't find the stub at all a problem, but it really adds weight to the book for it to be bound in this way.
Right. Each of us did a certain element. Keith dealt with all of the elevation pages, so these are all his. He did all 4 gates. I did a page that dealt with more of the metaphysics and the word business that dealt with that particular garden. For instance, this is my page. And then Jeffrey, you'll see, did an interior. We'll get to that in a minute.
As a companion, this thing really is a sort of a direct relationship in terms of the kinds of things we individually focused on the sculpture piece, and we do essentially the same type of thing in terms of the book.
So,
Now this is, we've gone through the lily gate and out into the rose, and then in going through the building, you had to go back into the center core. And so the same way with the book, this leads you to the center of the book, our little centerfold, which is a watercolor that Jeffrey Bishop did. And again, we screen printed our text on his paper before he started watercoloring. So always the words are leaking through the architecture of the form. And I like that.
that's a very striking piece.
And a nice page.
That's real nice.
Yeah. This was the violet gate, and the door was actually shaped like this. It was a little scary going through it. It was a place where the words are violated. The stems are cut. It's a place where you cut the flowers and you separate them from their roots, and they begin to act on their own out in sort of the world. That's
A tiny bit of historical background in this. Modern fine printing and the book arts have been around for a long time, but the primary person responsible for sort of reinventing the wheel was William Morris around the turn of the century, who after 1800, when book production went to quantity rather than quality, by the 1870s he got pretty disgusted with that and decided that he would like to go back to the traditional form of the book, which was on handmade paper and hand printed with fancy designs. And so he actually commissioned artists for the first time to redo these kinds of formats. And this is where this collection started. So we start with traditional fine printing examples from the turn of the century. And I think what's very interesting about the collection here is it's constantly being added to. And then on this table there are basically some of the things that today seemed like the right things to get out. We have maybe 2,500 books in this collection. Most of these things, people have been trying to develop a book that will last a long time. If we're lucky, the books will last 100 years. 100 years isn't really a long time in the greater scheme of things. This collection, the rare book collection, as well as containing these kinds of materials, contains Babylonian clay tablets, pieces of papyrus, books from the first 50 years of printing from 1450, medieval style manuscripts that have lasted a long time. I would like to see these books last that long, so that somebody coming 500 years from now will at least be able to see that somebody cared. Like Bill, I too think that computers will take over a lot of the book format, and I think I'm less enthusiastic about that than he is. What I'm concerned about is that this style of book will go away, and we will not have that. And I look to printmakers, really, and the people who are artists to save the book from destruction. I think we probably won't buy paperbacks anymore. You won't need to. But I don't think anything, whether it's a computer or a videotape or whatever, will ever replace the physical feeling of holding a book that's on handmade paper and being able to turn the pages yourself. I think it's a very personal experience, and I think that's what the responsibility and the role of the library is to provide you and anyone off campus and pretty much anybody in the world who wants to use this collection with that kind of opportunity. So.
If you're curious about techniques in these books, most book artists and publishers are so proud of how they got this done that they will include somewhere in the book a whole paragraph about the techniques, what kind of paper it's printed on, and what kind of twine is used in the binding, and so on. So look in the back and sometimes the front for some kind of explanatory paragraph. Screen print, as Sandra mentioned, hasn't been used very much. There are a few screen print students in the class. This is one of the first that came into the collection that uses screen printing. Another process, just to kind of leap ahead into the future a little bit, is the use of the computer. I did this book myself, and this image on the cover is printed by a jet ink printer. The jet ink printer is driven by a computer. The computer was driven by me, the human being, having drawn this image from a series I called A Handmade Dog. The pages inside, or which are in the display, which look like they're inside, are really black and white electrocopy prints done on a extrographic machine, an electric, like a Xerox machine. So you have here essentially images which were created by a computer and an artist, which eventually become a book. One other book I want to mention in the spirit of electronics is a book over here that's called Graphic Video. This is from an edition of 18 books created several years ago by 6 people, myself included, Akira Kurosaki from Japan, and 4 students. And it was a quick, intensive summer workshop called Graphic Video. And the thesis of the workshop was that there's a relationship between printmaking and video. So the students did video as an art form and created graphics from those experiences. And the book that I have here is one of 18 copies, which tends to bring all that together. So this is silkscreen monotype on the cover, photo silkscreen for the typography, and on the inside, a rather temporary printing process called diazo or brown line. And on the inside, reading in one direction, as the text points out, that in this direction are the visual works of 6 people. So as you open this book, you see visual works done in some tradition of graphics. Here we have black and white Xerox with color Xerox edition. Here we have brown line print with hand coloring and video images. Here we have silkscreen with, what do you call that, tipped in, glued in pictures from color Xerox. The color Xerox are pictures from TV screen. So you see there's this constant interplay, I think the word is, between the video and the graphics tradition. So it's called graphic video. This is my own section that we're seeing right now. Now, that's the end of the book, but look what happened. This is from an edition of 18 books created several years ago by 6 people, myself included, Akira Kurosaki from Japan, and 4 students. And it was a quick, intensive summer workshop called Graphic Video. And the thesis of the workshop was that there's a relationship between printmaking and video. So the students did video as an art form and created graphics from those experiences. And the book that I have here is one of 18 copies, which tends to bring all that together. So on the front you have photo silkscreen as the typography, in this case handwritten calligraphy by Akira Kurosaki, which I may need to be corrected, but I think it says graphic video. And on the inside you have the text of the words, in other words, by these individuals. So as you look through the book, you find the words that the students and myself and Akira decided were fit statements to make about the relationship of the interplay of video and graphics. Here's an article that I wrote using color Xeroxed images taken from slides of the work sessions in the video art class. We have silkscreen, handwritten, template, and stencil techniques here. One of my favorite parts of this collection.
I just wanted to point out the different formats that are here. It's like the kind Bill has used, which in the book trade is known as accordion books. Books that are folded up in some size, depending on what kind of paper you have, and then not sewn, but sometimes pasted or glued together so that you could make an infinitely long accordion, and then just folded up. Sometimes folded up and not done anything more than that, and other times folded up and put into some kind of container. So this is one of the things that hopefully this collection can offer you as printmakers as ways to develop how to put your prints in some kind of book format. You may not want to learn how to bind. You may not want to produce something really elaborate. You may, in fact, want to do something elaborate. This is the same format done by a book artist who is a printer and a paper artist. This is pulp paper, different colors of pulp paper laid on, and then by using a vacuum table, these forms are created. But it's still basically the same style of accordion format, and you can fold this up in a number of different ways. Another Asian style of binding, which is called a side sewn binding, which is the simplest form of binding, where you just, on one end, simply sew down these pages.
Could you explain what a chapbook is?
A chapbook usually means, when most people use the word chapbook, what they mean by that is a small, usually bound in paper, a small book that can be easily held in one hand, that is generally one signature. A signature being a single piece of paper which has been folded up 4 times, 6 times, 8 times, depending on the size, how many folds you get out of that piece of paper. Sometimes it is sewn in the middle so that the covers and the paper are stuck together, and other times it doesn't have to be. And a broadside, which is called a broadsheet in England, is just a single sheet printed or illustrated on one side, can be any size. Usually, the next question is, well, what makes a difference between a poster and a broadside? I don't really know. I don't know where poster came from. Posters tend to be considered very cheap and things that you hang up outside, and if they get wet, you don't slash your wrists. And broadsides tend to be more expensive, and you wouldn't consider pasting it up with rubber cement outside.
One of the things I want to mention, too, in terms of broadsides, is that the publication of this thing, which to me looks just like a print I might see in a print exhibition, is classified here as a broadside, and its technique is offset litho. So by introducing the concept of the broadside or the book, is allowing artists like yourself to go into areas of printing which haven't been recognized as valid art techniques, such as offset printing. And offset printing is one of the most fascinating printmaking processes going today. So you see, by entering it through what you're calling broadside, you then validate yourself with the history of art and the book and broadsides or whatever, but you're using new technology in the offset litho. I want to mention too the notion of the bound book versus the unbound, or the paginated book versus the unpaginated. Mare's book is a fan fold, and I think she has done what are called case bound. Am I correct, Mare? In other words, pieces that, this isn't one of Mare Blocker's books, this is Suzanne Ferris's, but these pieces all lift out and probably could be mixed up in the case. This is interesting because it then means that there is no limited sequence in which the owner, the looker at the book, needs to see these things. So sequence is changed. Whereas in a book which is bound on one edge, you must look at it this way or else you feel like you're going to the middle or the end of the book. There's this implied structure, I guess, in a bound book, whereas an unbound book there is less of an implied structure. Things like that can fascinate you as visual artists who might want to rearrange the sequence in the experience of your art. So binding versus non-binding, broadsides, chapbooks, all these all imply some sort of attitude toward your work.
Oh, I did remember something I forgot. Book handling. Anything that's too big to be picked up and held in one hand and support both covers is too big to be picked up. You should either put it on your lap or leave it on the table. Even though it's much easier to find the illustrations, which may be the thing that you're most interested in, by leafing through it as if it were a Sears catalog, you know, like phone books. So the best thing to do is to turn the pages from the center of the page, either individually or in large groups, but not sort of thumbing through them. Books are pretty sturdy if you treat them nicely, but this hinge is the weakest part of the book, and if you flop the covers around, they fall off pretty easily, and you can see that in the main collection and all the branches. You know, you find a lot of books that are just barely together. If you're interested in things like techniques of how to do things, paper making, marbling, letterpress printing, I'd be happy to talk with you about any of the, most of the pieces out here are things that we've acquired very recently, so they all have stories behind them, and you know, I could probably, if you're interested in who did them and why, I might know that. So beyond that, we should probably let them look at things.
And with those words, well, thank you, Sandra, for your dialogue here. Taping is continuing, but I'm going to stop our presentation and ask you to continue your browsing and enjoy the collection.